I just wonder whether Scott Morrison's going to be fully briefed to shove a sock down the throat. I mean, she is a joke, this woman, an absolute and utter lightweight.
George Floyd, who is a piece of shit, incidentally, was killed.
I'm Jennie Hill, founder of MFW.
Activist group Mad Fucking Witches last week claimed his scalp on social media.
With the power of 100,000 angry followers, we've taken down some of Australia's worst media shock jobs.
Sam Newman has announced he will no longer appear on Channel 9.
Now we've set our sights on Rupert Murdoch and his bigoted, bully boy, science-denying mouthpiece, News Corporation.
We should approach climate change with great scepticism.
I'm having a fireside chat with former Prime Minister and First Lady, Kevin Rudd and Thérèse Rein. Stay tuned.
How much lockdown did you have?
We had months of lockdown. It was nearly as harsh as Melbourne, but not quite. We didn't have the 5 kilometre limit, and we didn't have what else? We didn't have like just the 1 hour that you're allowed to leave home each day.
Right.
So apart from that, we had nothing open, like no cafes, no shop. Oh, we still had Bunnings and things like that were open.
Yeah.
whereas they weren't in Melbourne, and closed shops and stuff were open.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite as bad, but it
felt really different, didn't it?
It was pretty full on. I mean, you would have had that March, April, when everyone was sort of locked down.
Yeah. So basically I put myself into lockdown in about mid-February. And for health reasons, and then Kevin came home from New York in mid-March, put himself into quarantine so for 2 weeks, and then we basically have been together ever since. All time, and walking. We were able to do things like walk on the beach, which was, pretty beautiful. It's hard to complain about any of that, but it's been really lovely as things have opened up again, and so it's been really good and fascinating watching the difference between the kinds of conversations we've been able to have in Australia about lockdown and safety and health first, lives first, against what's been happening in America, led by the president, who, was he wearing a mask? Wasn't he wearing a mask? Was this no more than a cold? In complete science denial, just the whole conversation in that country was really hampered, I think, by Fox News and their impact. Anyway, so interesting.
But you would still have a lot of friends over there, and all the rest of it too. I know Ann Summers is a friend of mine, and had a few she's in the middle of New York still, and it just to get that first-hand account, it's not through a newspaper or whatever, it's terrifying, isn't it?
And I've got a friend in El Paso and on the border of Texas, and they've got, I think, 10 or 12 mortuary trucks, because they can't keep up with the number of people who are dying. The hospitals are actually full. It's bad. And when they tried to implement a lockdown that was challenged in the courts, and it was, you can't do that. Such a different conversation here.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Well, thank you for the chat. We're both on a similar wavelength, I think, in terms of what we're trying to do. So, and I heard that Kevin told me that you had maybe been following the witches, Thérèse. So thanks for that.
Yeah. So
bit scary and
and watching your work. Congratulations on the campaign on Alan Jones, and also the advertising campaign. I think that's been really powerful. Really interested in what the critical elements were of that campaign. What you think made that successful?
Against Alan Jones, I think just, as you know, Alan Jones had said a lot of things about women in the past, going back to, Julia Gillard and even back past then. And I was involved in the campaign against him back then. But I think what made the difference this time was partly that everyone had evolved a little bit more on misogyny and those sorts of things, but also just that it was said about a current world leader who Australians admire, and she was saying truthful things about climate, and just actually saying that you should give, that Scott Morrison should give her a few backhanders. It was just, I think it just went beyond the pale, and I think that was why so many men got involved, when before, I think back in 2012 and other times, I think it was a lot of women who were outraged, but I think this time a lot of men thought, as well as the misogyny, it was about, you can't say those things about a world leader, a leader of a country. We had things like directors of the Commonwealth Bank getting in touch anonymously to lend their support. We had sort of lawyers at senior law firms, the kind of people that you would think would be very conservative. And they were like, this has just gone too far. We've got to get rid of this guy. So I think it was that level of support. And honestly, we just started this little campaign, and it was like, the way we described it was like surfing a bucking bronco. Like, we were just sort of organising it, but we weren't doing the work. There were tens of thousands of emails going out. There were companies that were just they couldn't run their businesses because their email chains were so clogged. And I think it was just that the weight of anger was enormous. It was time. Yeah. So it took 9 months still. That's a long time.
No, the campaign was terrific, Jenny.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? How do you see this campaign, Thérèse, that Kevin's doing? Were you, this is a bit of a personal question, I guess, but were you in favour of him doing it? And how do you see sort of some of the pushback that he's got in the Murdoch press? I know that must be very painful. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So firstly, I think it's really critical for a democracy to have fact-based debate and discussion and civil conversation. I think how Murdoch has, and his outlets here have evolved, has been to being far from that. I think it's really important in a democracy to have a highly capable, agile fourth estate holding government to account. And I don't think we have that now in this country. I think, and that has changed and evolved over the last 10 years, I suppose.
So you think it wasn't so bad before that?
I think it wasn't so bad before that. I think it has become increasingly vitriolic and divisive, and not fact-based and opinion-led and personality-led, and basically that News Corporation is a debased currency in terms of journalism. I don't think it was quite that bad before. My sense towards the middle of 2010 was that there were a lot of deep currents flowing, which were about vested interests in bed with News Corporation. And there were clearer and clearer, for me, on the sidelines, I guess, agendas emerging from News Corporation. Obviously, Mr. Murdoch's driven by money. He also wants lower taxes. He also wanted the return of work choices. He wanted no constraints on him. He particularly would have liked Sunday access to the Prime Minister, so that the Australian, which is the national paper, was in its proper position, I'm quoting, proper position of setting the news agenda nationally for the week. And he was looking for coziness, which he wasn't getting. He was looking for a monopoly or duopoly, for example, on realestate.com. And he was looking for no NBN. He did not want NBN because he wanted free rein for his Foxtel, and he wanted to optimise his financial return on his Foxtel investment. He wanted no action on climate change. And I guess that became clearer to me with the kind of takedown of Malcolm Turnbull when he was leader of the opposition and putting in Tony Abbott. And he wanted no accountability for him. He wants to operate in the darkness. So I think that wasn't nearly as clear to me in 2006, 7, 8, even 9, like we're 8, 9, we're kind of up to here with dealing with the global financial crisis. But then that became clearer and clearer to me. We bumped into someone, this is, I think, in your second volume of your biography, we bumped into this person at a party in New York. And he said, "Oh, you're Australian?" And we went, "Yeah, we're Australians." And he said, "Oh, I have a really good mate who's an Australian who actually works for NewsCorp." And we went, "Oh, yeah." Right. And so I went.
He didn't know who you were, Kevin. This person
had no idea. And I said, "Who's that?" And he said, "Oh, Col Allen." He said he's normally at this party, or he's normally here in the Hamptons this weekend every year staying with me, but there's missed one. And that's when his boss, when Rupert sent him back to Australia to, what was his words, bring down, to take down this, the then Prime Minister.
No, the then President. He didn't know we had a Prime Minister.
No, the then President.
Then Australian President, who was a dead set, no, he didn't say dead set, who was a real socialist.
Who was a real socialist.
And that was you.
Yeah.
That was you. Yeah, they're so scared of the word socialist, aren't they?
And I think we may have asked a question like, how is he going to do that on terrible tabloid front pages and all that kind of stuff.
And he went on to boast about the campaign, how effective it was in getting rid of that president guy, whatever his name was.
And then Kevin said, "That was me." And he should have seen his face, like he just disappeared at the rate of knots. So that was 2013.
I mean, a bit later than that. That was 2015.
Right.
No, it was 2013, the campaign.
The campaign was 2013.
The conversation was 2015.
Yeah.
But the campaign was the 2013 campaign, where you got those really almost cartoonish Pravda-like front pages of Kevin, and just massive lies all over. And I think it's certainly got worse. So there are a couple of things. One, I think, in terms of the privately owned or listed company-owned media, it's really important that there is a whole range of competition and diversity there, and not monopoly-like behaviour. Secondly, or control. And secondly, I think it's really important to have a properly funded public broadcaster. In a democracy that is not subject to ministerial threats, that is not subject to having all its funding cut furiously, that can tell the story of the country, that can do investigative reporting, that can have real and diverse conversations and show the diversity of the country, including small places that otherwise mightn't have voices. And what we have seen systematically is the cutting away of the ABC funding. And I'm appalled by that, frankly. So, and I know that actually, I know that's the other thing that Murdoch wants. He wants no public broadcaster. He wants to be being given taxpayers' money, and he doesn't want it to be going to the ABC or to SBS or anything like that, because he wants to control the debate. He wants to be able to set public policy settings in such a way that he maximises his money. So is it unpleasant when he then uses his printing and publishing capability such as it is, and that is much diminished, when he uses that to attack Kevin personally? Yes, that's unpleasant, but it also means we're bothering him. Otherwise he wouldn't do it.
Doesn't it? It's such a sign of success, isn't it?
It's such a sign of success.
Yeah.
So, and what we have really noticed is this campaign is something that you've been doing. It's something that that Get Up are strongly now involved in, and I saw the climate change, the anti-climate change agenda pushed by Murdoch, and their research on that come out today. It's something that Kevin is doing, and something now that Malcolm is also really strongly involved in. It has taken courage for everyone in this movement to be stepping up, putting out their hands, saying, look, this is not good enough. This is not what we want in our democracy. We don't want the Americanization of our democracy. We don't want it to be Fox Newsed. We don't want it to be poisoned. This is precious for me and my family. My uncle died for the democracy. My aunt and my mother served in the WAF. My father became a paraplegic as a result of a plane crash fighting for our democracy. This is personal for me, and I know it is for Kevin. And having the right media settings is critically important.
Yeah, and for me as well. And I think you're right that it's at the point now where nearly everyone who's working for Mad Witches is anonymous. I'm the only one who's not. And I think I was saying to Kevin on the phone the other week that I've actually had to move house because of the and doxing. You know, my address has been published online and things like that. So I haven't been on the front page of the Australian as Kevin has, but a lot of it's more covert in my case of, you know, of having to move house and having to take a lot of security steps and stuff like that, which you may have had to do as well. But it's part of that was about Alan Jones. It wasn't all about Murdoch, but it's got to the point where it's just not. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I've heard Kevin say it's anti-democracy what we're looking at the moment.
And you see people also like Freddie Geordies, who has stood up, and then he just gets attacked by the mainstream media going, how dare he? And he's had, and things are uncomfortable. Let me say, because Kevin has a very known face, what is happening all the time, including from tradies, all these lots, just people in the community, people come up and go, thank you for the petition. And they go, you're doing the right thing. And they say, it takes courage. And we're with you all the way. And so every time now Murdoch is attacking on the front page of his ghastly papers that he can't even give away, but I'm sure he speaks highly of me. Every time he does that, because Kevin's got a recognisable name and face, the hundreds and thousands of people who contact us, who via whether it's Facebook or Twitter or in the street or wherever, and say, good on you, we really need this, we really need to keep going. So I think the whole movement, and the whole movement needs to take absolute encouragement and courage from that, and affirmation that we're not doing this on our own. We're not doing it for, can I say shits and giggles?
Yes.
You just did.
We're not,
I think you did.
this is not for fun, right?
Yeah.
This is because we absolutely think there's something crook here.
Mm.
And it means that corruption is not being held to account, government is not being held to account.
Yeah.
And we're not getting the government we deserve or pay for.
That's exactly.
Or fought for, or died for, or suffered for. So, nah, not okay.
Yeah.
What's
What's his end game? What's Murdoch's end game with all this?
Money.
For either of you? I mean, I know some of it, but what, in your opinion, is his main end game with this?
Murdoch, I've met him many times over the years, and the sons I've met and the senior executives I've met, and I've observed the behaviours, and I've spoken to others who have either worked for them or worked with them. And I find most people agree on these three things in this order of priority. One is there's never enough money. It's always money, number one. Two, following from one, but separate from it as well, is power, because as Kissinger once said, it's the ultimate aphrodisiac. And for people like, something I actually don't agree with, but that's, I've seen Murdoch in a room with US presidents, and it's like he's hypnotized by the power. Like it's like a drug. And the third thing is genuine ideology, which is that he's a far right ideologue who believes, one, that the state should by and large wither away, because that means lower taxes for everybody, including him, and given that he pays, it seems, negligible tax in this country anyway. Two, a state which doesn't get in the road of business by regulating the environment, let alone on climate. And three, a state which doesn't regulate the labour market to protect ordinary working families. And so that's the core of the ideology. And then you've got, elements of what I describe as, racism and sexism rolled into it as well. And so it's money, power, and a far right ideology. And it's this creative interplay of those three things which inform the decisions. Let me tell you, I've never known a News Corporation editor anywhere in the world who doesn't know what's expected of them, even though they'll then take out the Bible or the Quran or whatever and swear an oath which says they've never been directed to do anything. Let me tell you, they all know what they're expected to do.
Well, one of them wrote that down a few weeks ago because someone tweeted, it might have been me who, the witches who tweeted on it, and you commented on it, Thérèse, who I can't remember the name of the guy, but he was saying that when he worked for Murdoch, he was told what to write about you, Kevin, and everyone was just gobsmacked that he just admitted it in an article. Wish I could remember his name, but
yeah, that was a really strange article. I can't remember what it was now because it's kind of fast and furious, isn't it? But I think that third party story about Col Allen and the 2013 federal campaign, that just says it all, doesn't it? He was sent by Murdoch to Australia to garrot Kevin.
Yeah.
And when Col Allen got to Australia, I was leaked this story later on by one of the, shall we say, more squeamish editors. Allen got them all together in Sydney just after he arrived, the very beginning of that 2013 election campaign, and said, the message from Rupert is this: go hard, go Rudd, and don't let up. Okay.
Wow.
And that was the assembled editors. And if you look at the front page coverage in that campaign, that was the one that had me dressed up in Nazi uniforms and God knows whatever else, and accused of varying crimes against humanity most days. But the single objective was, we want this guy out of power because he's uncomfortable for our power and our profit. So we get rid of him. And that's the way he thinks and acts, not just here, but you've seen what he's tried to do in America with Trump. You've seen what he's done in the UK with Brexit and with the Conservatives, and what his general modus operandi is. So my overall view is, when I first used the word cancer on democracy, I meant it. I mean, it's just, it's eating away like a malignant cancer. Thérèse just said, one of the byproducts, apart from what we've just spoken of, is because they act as a protection racket for the Conservatives in office, federally for the first time, we're beginning to have a corrupt government. I mean, whatever the accusations were against Julia Gillard, myself, and the Howard government, these were not accused of being corrupt.
No.
But what we now have is, when there is a corruption scandal, and there are about 6 or 7 of them running at the moment, they are buried in the Murdoch press or not circulated at all, not covered at all, to the point we now rely upon the thin line of the Auditor General to bring their stuff to the surface, a bit of reporting from the ABC and a bit of word of mouth.
And The Guardian.
And that's how we end up being corrupt.
Yeah.
And that's how you come back to what you said, Thérèse, about how the ABC, they're all just sort of seem to be, you know, Fairfax obviously, but the ABC as well is sort of falling into line on those Morrison talking points, you know.
Well, and they're just, you know, where if you're a journalist, where do you go to work? So do you go to the ABC, which is being downsized, and ridden roughshod politically? If you can't get a job there, do you go to Fairfax, which has its own trends? Do you go to The Guardian if you can get a job there? Great. If you can't, you're going to go to radio, maybe, bit of variety, maybe go to West Australia. But then there's news, and that's the behemoth. And in a way, it's a kind of almost monopolistic employer, isn't it? Because if you get blackbanned by them, where are you going to work? Where are you going to work? Now, journalists, I think, the ones that I know and have had long conversations with, why did they go into journalism? They believe of the role of journalists in a democracy in terms of holding people accountable. They don't go in to sell their soul and and become celebrities in their own right. They go actually in search of truth and to find facts and tell stories. And it's not their fault. Yeah. It's not their fault.
No.
What is wrong is the balance of ownership and the overweening power of News Corporation. And that just makes it really hard for people who start out going, this is what I want to do. I want to find out the facts. I want to be an investigative journalist. I want to hold government accountable. I want to tell the stories of the nation or the area I'm living in or this particular, the economy or whatever. And they're being told what to write. They're being told to suspend fact-based journalism investigation, and they're being told you have to write, sure you can write the story, but make sure you take as much paint off this person or this idea as you possibly can as you go along. Yeah. That's not what we need in a democracy.
Do you think that maybe what we're doing, what you're doing, there's obviously other people coming in now too, can it make a difference?
Yes, I believe it can. And I believe, and how we know that is the fact that they're attacking. The fact that they're attacking means they're hurting. Their hip pockets are hurting. The hip pockets are hurting over advertising. The hip pockets are hurting over I've seen a campaign which was, boycott the Herald Sun. Their hip pockets are hurting over people just go, I'm not going to read that rubbish. People going, I'm going to switch off from Foxtel. And people going, I'm not going to use realestate.com.au. I'm going to go to alternatives. They are hitting back. The fact that they are hitting back means we're hurting them. I think the Senate inquiry will be very uncomfortable. I'm hoping that there will be a Royal Commission, and I'm hoping that they will be held finally to account.
Yeah.
I think that's where, Jenny, also the early pioneering work of MFW has been so important. You witches and warlocks together, and because
we're not real witches, by the way. You know where that came from, don't you? Did I tell you that story? Yeah, it came from something Peter Dutton said. It's always been a bit embarrassing that we're not real witches, but I think some people think we are. I'm just
Well, I'm sure that's what Dutton puts around anyway. So
yeah.
we're all familiar with where it came from, and I think it's wonderful that you guys just took it up as a badge of honour.
Owned it.
And just owned it, and basically said two to the valley to him. But the bottom line is, I mean, MFW showed great courage back when nobody was really speaking out about this stuff, and you took on Jones. And it was a highly effective campaign, and it represents therefore a story for the rest of us who are engaged in this campaign to bring about a diversity of proper media diversity for the country's future, that the people's voice matters, and the people's voice is mobilised around a reasonable argument. Ultimately, these enormous citadels of power start to have cracks appear in the wall. And in the case of the mighty, St. Allen of Jones, the whole wall came tumbling down. That's because you guys made it happen. I had nothing to do with that. You made it happen. And when I started calling for a Royal Commission on Murdoch a couple of years ago, just as a hashtag in my normal social media work, very interesting that over about a year, people say, yeah, we should have a Royal Commission of that guy. And then after a year or so, I've been using the word cancer on democracy. People can say, yeah, he is a cancer on democracy. So I think we both know from our respective campaigns, Jenny, that these things build because we're not spreading bullshit. It's actually true. And we're actually outlining a course of action, which is real. And if his big objective is money, hitting him where his and them where their hip pocket is frankly the best way through to their brain.
Well, that's why I think what you're doing and we're doing, it sort of dovetails in quite well, because you're doing, hopefully getting the Royal Commission and getting this Senate inquiry. That's a way of just getting so much information out to so many people, which is critical. And I think what we're doing has always just been about getting advertisers to withdraw, and that's sort of the profit side. And I think, and then you've got other groups doing things as well, but it's like everything is working towards the common good. None of us are doing exactly the same thing, and we're not really working together or anything like that, but it's just, we're all taking our little niche, and hopefully it's all chipping away.
I think so. It's a bit like watching, cracks appear in a wall, then at the point at which the cracks start to join up, that we know there's a problem. And so in our case, as you're right, we've begun a campaign about the need for a Royal Commission. And quite spontaneously, by the way, the Senate inquiry erupted out of that because we had 500,000 signatures. I didn't sit down and lobby the senators. It just went boof.
Yeah.
And it was a surprise.
It was fabulous.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be the first quarter of next year, 2021.
And there've been a number of people who've made submissions to that.
There's now more than about 5,000 individual submissions. This is not us. Here's a template submission. Please sign this thing. These are 5,000 individuals who have actually taken the time to do their two-finger typing like me, bip, 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 and put in a submission.
Wow.
Then there's your work, which is enormously important, working on advertisers. And Others are, engaged in this as well across, a very wide cross section. And it's kind of interesting with Turnbull joining the cause. It's not party political. It is actually about the health of the democracy. And when in the last 19 elections since 2010, Murdoch has campaigned viciously for one side of politics and viciously against another, and campaigned viciously against all forms of climate change action, you cross a line, and that line has been well and truly crossed. And so when I'm calling on people, for example, to say no to realestate.com.au, which is 62% owned by Murdoch's News Corporation, huge cash cow for Murdoch, and saying to people, say no to this platform if you're concerned about Murdoch's campaign against climate change. And suddenly we've got, already 3,000 or 4,000 people who have signed the pledge in less than a week. So where will that go to over 12 months? I'm not sure. But unless we try, we don't know where this momentum takes us. So it takes people like you and MFW to stick your head up above the trenches. A few people's head gets blown off on the way through. Mine's been blown off several times. Thérèse sewn it back on. Sometimes inelegantly. Poof, there it goes. And then,
I think what you're doing is great on real estate. We talked about this a couple of times, but people they don't know who owns it. We did a survey on Twitter and Facebook a few weeks ago, and 80% of people, there was about 4,000 people responded, 80% of them didn't know who owned it. So that's, right there, we both know that, we all know there's a lot of issues there with people. Maybe some people can't stop using it or won't stop using it, but just people don't know who owns it, and that's part of, Murdoch likes it that way, doesn't he? The secret.
He does.
Well, Murdoch
the shadows.
Murdoch and the other shareholders want it that way, which is, this is just, Rupert providing a community service. Well, pigs might fly. There's a whole squadron of them just passed here in Queensland. Because this thing's valued at $19 billion. It produced a revenue last year of about $1 billion. It's a big cash cow, given that his print mastheads and Sky
all lose money.
Will either cash neutral or cash negative. So this is a big profit centre. So we are absolutely entitled to say, in my own campaign, I'm signing the pledge not to use realestate.com.au. And if others feel so inclined, I'm sure they'll do that themselves.
And we're doing sort of the advertiser side at the moment on realestate.com. They're on all the advertisers on realestate.com, and we don't go after the individual or small real estate company owners, but the head offices of the big chains. They're on our lists as well for people to have a chat to them. Maybe it's very civil, as everything you do is as well. It's just getting in touch, saying, you're funding the end of humanity, basically. I mean, that's the bottom line of what it is, isn't it? It's
true on climate change, yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah. That's true on climate change. They're funding the end of humanity.
Yeah.
And not just humanity.
That's right. Well,
but I can tell you that campaign your campaign on that is starting to work, because real estate agents locally have come up to me and said, yeah, we're swapping. We're not going to use.
Kidding? That's fabulous. Well, that's because of your thing as well. It's,
it's just a cumulative effort. These things.
Joint thing, yeah.
But I mean, your key point, Jenny, is that the vast majority of Australian punters don't know. By the time, this campaign has run for a while, and your campaign has run for a while, the principal objective is to ensure that all Australians know that this is a Rupert cash cow.
Yeah, they can make a choice then.
And then they can make a choice.
Yeah, do they want to support someone who doesn't believe in carbon neutral economy, doesn't want to embrace solar, which actually saves people a lot of money on their electricity, doesn't want to do any of the things, like the campaign against electric vehicles in the last federal campaign, which was, that would be terrible that everyone
enraging.
them. And it's really not terrible. It's much cheaper and they're easier to maintain. They're cheaper to maintain, all those things. But he doesn't want that. Well, Australians, we don't want to be boycotted on trade because we're dragging the chain on climate change. And, you know, we don't, and we want to be doing our bit to contribute to the future of for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, you know, and not only not just here, right, around the world. Yeah. So he's wrong.
Yeah, but even as a Victorian too, I mean, even more immediate stuff than the climate change stuff, we, as a Victorian, we blame a lot of what went wrong in Victoria on Murdoch as well, because the newspapers and the journalists at Dan Andrews' press conferences were they made everything so confusing. They caused people not to follow rules. They caused people to, you know, disregard what was going on or to think it was all a hoax. So I don't know, maybe this is something I shouldn't even say publicly, but you're talking about getting close to being responsible for deaths, you know, of people not doing the right thing. And luckily it didn't break out in other states, but the Herald Sun, I mean, Andrew Bolt, just day after day after day, just hammering this COVID's just
Peter Credlin as well, yeah.
Oh, they flew Peter Credlin down to Melbourne, didn't they, from Sydney, just to hammer at the press conferences. But luckily Dan Andrews maintained the support and whatever, because basically I think most people could just see what was going on and wanted not to die or for their grandparents to die or whatever. But it wasn't for the want of trying, was it?
But the principle at stake in this is that the Murdoch abuse of media monopoly in this country and media power in other countries has had a profound principle at stake, which is it is anti-science and anti-fact, and it is pro-opinion and pro-ideology. And so when you have a matter of, frankly, empirical science as to what causes this virus to come into being and what science tells us about how the danger is best reduced, the Murdoch phenomenon, particularly in the United States, but they've tried it here as well, is to empower people to challenge the science on COVID-19, just like they've spent the last 10 to 20 years challenging the science on climate change. So the danger for the collective civilization of which we're all members is that, you know, it's now about 250 years since the beginning of the Enlightenment. And this movement that Murdoch personifies, and the crazy far-right nutjobs who basically accumulate themselves around it, is deeply hostile to empirical science, deeply hostile to scientific evidence. And the attacks in this state of Queensland were on the chief medical officer over her advice about how to handle. I mean, she and the Premier up here, Anastasia Palaszczuk, done a terrific job. Two strong, intelligent, fact-based women leaders, and the bucket of vitriol from all these News Corporation male yobbos because they don't like these leaders articulating fact and science and medical conclusions from it. Instead, I have my opinion, and my opinion is just as good as your opinion, and therefore open the borders, throw open the national economy, hang the consequences, and as you see in the United States, gives rise to the politicization of whether you should wear a bloody mask or not. And the consequence, literally tens and hundreds of thousands of people have died.
Yeah. But what they didn't count on was that Queenslanders wanted the borders shut, didn't they? Like most of them. Same in Western Australia. Like people are attacking Mark McGowan and Anastasia and whatever and Dan Andrews, but in each state, I just found it fascinating how the majority of people in each state were like, no, we want this. You know, they expected to get their way the way they have with so much else. And they just...
So under the Australian Constitution, one final little point is that the states and territories run the public health system. The federal government doesn't. And so it's the state chief medical officers and health ministers and premiers who make these decisions under our constitutional arrangements. And what I found fascinating is that the public were kind of alert to that. And so that's what these guys do. They run the hospitals. They should know. And they backed the opinion ultimately, as you saw in Queensland, as we're seeing elsewhere.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the other part of this is this kind of systematic undermining of access to education, which is part of Murdoch's agenda, because he wants to coerce and control and influence with opinion and not have people empowered to be asking questions and challenging and discussing and debating facts. And so you have, this absolute attack on the universities that's happened this year with slashing of research funds, slashing of the student fee arrangement, and then 3 distinct changes to the JobKeeper legislation to prevent universities from being able to sustain their employment, their workforce, and their researchers and their teachers who they have built, where they've built capacity over decades with a lot of hard work, and that's just been slashed. And where is the coverage of that? Where is the really systematic coverage of that? Where is the championing of universities? Well, you won't find that in the Murdoch press.
And all deliberate.
He wants people to follow him and to get his own way.
Yeah. And also excluding all the international students from any support. I mean, not even, they couldn't get job seeker or anything. And yet, Australia's wooed that international relationship with students for years. And then all of a sudden they're like on food lines, eating charity. Just, but you're right, not getting into the press about or enough anyway. Yeah. What would you see as, what would indicate that we're all getting somewhere? Apart from, obviously, I know the Royal Commission's coming up. Oh, Thérèse, okay.
I'm so sorry. It's lovely to talk to you.
You too.
And thank you for the chat.
You're very welcome.
Kids and grandkids to pack off to Brisbane.
Yeah, so I'm going to do that. I'll see you later. Okay. Bye-bye.
See you later. See ya.
Sorry, Jenny.
That's all right. Apart from, obviously there'd be some outcomes from the Senate inquiry and possibly might get a Royal Commission. Apart from that, what would indicate that we were all getting somewhere, do you think?
When the media laws change and we then have a result which is rather than a corporation having 70% control of Australian print, that we have a much bigger diversity of ownership. You see, what Murdoch may do in the period ahead, if he realises there's a big social movement developing against him, is he may begin to moderate his coverage. In other words, to appear to be more reasonable. In fact, there's a few indications that they'll try and do that on aspects of climate change now. There's grudging editorial in recent days about sort of the political irresistibility of mid-century carbon neutrality. And this is kind of the News Corporation crab walk to a slightly more centrist position on climate change. And so we should be prepared for them to, as it were, appear to be more reasonable. But that is vastly different from the sheer possession of monopoly power, which enables them to abuse it still in the future in any direction they so choose.
Yeah.
So what we need is a change in the laws so that people like Murdoch can no longer have that monopoly power. And the second change to the laws or the regulations or the arrangements within the industry is more robust, a robust governance arrangement for factual reporting and fact-checking, so that the basic protocols of how news stories are put together are adhered to. Now, I'm not in the business of interfering in the freedom of the press, But unless the Australian Press Council begins to exhibit rigour in enforcing the standards which are supposed to apply to news reporting, then the abuse of media power will just get worse. So I think those are two core barometers of real change, Jenny. They're a way off, but your campaign's long term, so's ours.
So it won't obviously won't happen under an LNP government, those things that you're talking about.
Well, you know, what I find interesting is that if you listen to what some of the National Party is saying about Murdoch's wanton closure of regional and local newspapers around Australia, not just in Queensland, but in regional parts of the country, there is a mounting anger in rural communities, Conservative voting people who would normally vote National Party, saying, this guy's doing our community in the eye. He shut down our paper after 100 years, put it online, centralised the news coverage in some sort of common newsroom located in the capital city. It's the death of local journalism, of local stories. Now, I think, therefore, there is a broader coalition of voices to be brought together on this. And so I think people outside capital cities, whether they vote Labor or National Party or regionally based Liberals, are going to come under increasing pressure. So we should be broad-based in this campaign.
Yeah. And also, I'm not saying, you know, any of us are sort of asking for people to suffer or lose their jobs or their livelihoods, but do you think there will be fallout from, you know, some of what China's doing on, say, coal and you know, the trade wars on barley and those sorts of things? Do you think that's the kind of thing that's sinking into regional communities?
The mathematical reality is that the Australian government over a long period of time now has not taken sufficient action to diversify the economy domestically and diversify our export markets more. Result, 40% of Australian exports go to one country, and within that one country, those are dominated by 3 or 4 commodities. So it makes us highly vulnerable. Now, in part, that's a failure of government policy. You might remember that when I was elected Prime Minister, I said, I want to be Prime Minister of a country that still makes things. I don't want to be a Prime Minister of a country which is little more than China's quarry and Japan's beach. And so we then began a campaign to roll out a large-scale diversification strategy, of which, frankly, the National Broadband Network was one key pillar. So that you could, so you're in Daylesford in Victoria, you could run a campaign and a business profitably with a fully functional internet connection anywhere in Australia, anywhere in the world.
I wish.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm here on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. It comes in and out. And this brings us almost full circle, that diversification of the Australian economy. One of its pillars was to link Australian small business across regional Australia and metro Australia and suburban Australia to the rest of the world and the rest of the country to build markets and market access. And what did Murdoch do? He said, no, that's going to bugger Foxtel, because Foxtel cable network, it'll be threatened by fibre optic to the premises, because Netflix will come in, affect my bottom line. There you go. Conservatives, Tony Abbott, you back the demolition of fibre optic to the premises and instead go for fibre optic to the node, which means you copper from the node to your house. And therefore you destroy high-speed broadband, but you protect Foxtel. And that's exactly what happened. So this appalling Murdoch agenda to protect his money and his power has affected all 25 million Australians wanting access to high-speed broadband.
Exactly.
And therefore undermine one of the key pillars of broadening our national economy beyond, as I said, being a quarry for China's industrial needs.
Exactly. Yeah. Can't disagree with any of that. I should let you go in a minute. Been talking for a while. What do you think we could all each, you know, if there was someone listening to this what would you be asking them to do to in your words, I think, to get our democracy back? Is there one thing you want people to do? Is there a couple of things people can do? What are the main things that we're going to do?
Public campaigns to bring about real change do take time. And so what I describe as strategic patience is necessary, because let me tell you, I've seen how these things work around the world. There comes a time when, as I've said before, the wall cracks, okay? But we don't know when that is. But let me tell you, it could be sooner than we all think on this question. So patience and perseverance is the first thing I'd suggest. The second is to redouble your efforts behind mad fucking witches. Because, I mean, you're a fantastic group. What you've achieved with the Alan Jones Memorial scalp hanging on a totem pole outside the house is frankly a fantastic achievement. You folk did that. I didn't.
It hasn't sunk in yet. It actually, I can't really, we don't really think about it in those terms. It's, I don't know what, I don't know why. I don't know whether this is women tend to denigrate themselves a bit sometimes, I think, but it never really, maybe because of all the COVID stuff, you know, we've had just COVID.
Well, yeah, I understand that, but I'm saying it's important to celebrate your victories.
Yeah.
That's a big one. It should give you encouragement to seek new victories in the future. But the reason I bring it up is to encourage all of your members and supporters for MFW across Australia to stay with your cause and to get more people to join it, because I think it's great. And then the third thing I think is where you see the opportunity to ram the message home to Murdoch financially where it hurts, then do so. Murdoch has had no qualms whatsoever about setting out to destroy anything or anyone that stands in his road to money and power. We need to have a deep realism about what we're up against here. It is often, and I've experienced a lot of this, it is hand-to-hand combat. I'm sure they're going to continue to denigrate me in the future, as they've done for the last 10 years or more. They'll denigrate others who are associated with this movement, like Malcolm Turnbull. And in other ways, they'll denigrate folks like you and who are engaged in this movement. But we should not be discouraged by that. As Thérèse said before in our discussion, we should be encouraged by it. You know, it's not just a badge of honour, but it's a mark of effectiveness. So I think there are 2 or 3 things I'd encourage your listeners and supporters to go forward with.
But yours as well. We've got to get more people on that real estate pledge and
Well, 3,000 or 4,000 pledges in a week or so is good. But frankly, I'll be interested when we get to 300,000. And because let me tell you, the number crunchers at realestate.com.au will be saying, oh my God, you know. And you see, at the end of the day, they can run, but they cannot hide.
No.
They are willingly signed up to a guy who has been the champion of climate change denialism for a very long time. And the American phenomenon of climate change denial would probably not exist to the extent that it does in the absence of the Fox television network in the United States at one end and the editorial position of the Wall Street Journal at the other end.
And the same with Brexit and the whole...
So people in Australia, all of us just need to be aware of the pernicious influence Murdoch has had on, let's call it, just basic, you know, mainstream progressive politics around the world. Like the European Union, for all its faults, is a good thing. Britain is stronger in Europe, and Europe is stronger with Britain in it. Yet you have Murdoch joining forces with Farage, for God's sake, to bring about Brexit, And then for a while, he flirted with supporting Scottish independence as well. In other words, to sink the stake into the heart of the United Kingdom itself.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one man with this much power. And in the United States, would Trump exist in the absence of the echo chamber of Fox News over the last 10, 20, 30 years, pushing the Republican Party further and further to the right, and now fracturing the American democracy by organising effectively or acting as an echo chamber for a mass movement who's concluding that these democratic elections for the 46th President of the United States have been corruptly conducted. I mean, these are deeply destructive interventions in the future of not just Western liberal democracy, but also the planet itself. And here in Australia, regarding prime ministers as political playthings. Oh, well, you've passed your use-by date, or you've become an irritant. Bang. Malcolm, sorry, goodbye. Scotty from marketing will be much more compliant, just like Tony was.
We've started calling him Aloha Scotty. Because this is the week he was in Hawaii last year. Just had to get that in there. We're planning to run a day on Sunday with sort of shirts and cocktails and things, like Hawaiian shirts and stuff, like to highlight that. But yeah, I mean, you're doing the real estate awareness thing, which is wonderful. We're doing the real estate advertisers, but next year we hope to start with the Foxtel advertisers, a lot more of them. And we know Foxtel's not making much of a profit, but there are still quite a lot of advertisers on there. So we're gonna try and watch, nearly all the shows and just write it all down and get it on the list. So that's sort of the next thing to come, I think, is and as I said before, there's people working in all different places, but I think it's gathering momentum, hopefully.
Well, again, I'd encourage you, Jenny, just to maintain your energy levels, because you running a movement like this takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, lots of commitment, and as you said, from time to time you get attacked. So all power to your arm, my friend. Keep at it.
Same to you. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been a lovely chat. It was so nice to meet Thérèse. And
she enjoyed the conversation, and as she said before, she had to dart off a bit early to make sure our grandkids get back to Brizzy. So,
of course.
So I better go and do the same. So good to be with you.
Look after yourself up there. Don't let that virus get in again.
No. We're watching New South Wales very closely at the moment.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, Kevin.
Thanks, Jenny.
Bye-bye.